Emma Morgan looked perfect on paper. Sleek resume, high-rise apartment, calendar packed with client calls and spin classes. But behind her polished exterior was a woman unraveling. Every smile in meetings was a mask. Every, "I'm fine," was a lie. She hadn't slept properly in weeks. The pressure to perform, to be exceptional, had calcified into something darker, dread. It all snapped on a rainy Thursday. She missed a major pitch, spilled coffee on her laptop, and cried in the back of a rideshare before stumbling into a tiny second-hand bookstore, one she'd never noticed before. Despite walking this street daily, the air inside was warm, musty, and oddly still. No music, no clerk in sight, just rows of shelves and a ticking grandfather clock. Drawn in, Emma drifted through the aisles like a ghost until one book, faded, unmarked spine, nearly fell into her hands. Its cracked leather cover read, "The Law of Assumption." Curious, she opened it. Inside, the first handwritten line glared up at her, in blood-red ink. "Assume it's true, and it becomes true." She scoffed. Another pseudoscience pitch. Law of Attraction's weird cousin, but something about the words they felt alive. On a whim, maybe to entertain herself, maybe because she was too numb to care, Emma whispered, "I assume I'll get a free coffee today." Then she tucked the book into her tote, left a $10 bill on the counter, and walked out. That afternoon, the barista at her usual cafe smiled and said, "Hey, it's on the house today. Our loyalty system glitched." "Lucky you." Emma blinked. She tried again. That night, she muttered before bed, "I assume tomorrow will be easy." The next morning, her alarm didn't go off, yet she arrived at work just in time to hear her department head had suddenly resigned. The same man who made her life hell for the last year. Then, the strangest thing yet, a text from her ex, out of nowhere, apologizing, crying, saying he still dreamed of her. Emma laughed it off, nervous, shaky, but in the quiet afterward, she reached for the book again. And this time, she didn't scoff, because if that one sentence could shift her reality, what else could she assume? The days that followed felt surreal, like Emma had slipped into someone else's life. Every morning began with an assumption. Today, I will receive good news. And she did. Her inbox overflowed with unexpected praise. A senior executive she barely knew offered her a promotion, out of nowhere, with a raise that made her breath catch. She assumed she'd meet someone kind, grounded, magnetic, and 2 days later, she did. His name was Julian. He was warm and attentive, quoting poetry without sounding pretentious. Their first date felt like it had already happened in a dream. When she mentioned a book she'd wanted to read, it appeared on her doorstep the next day with no note. She never mentioned her assumptions to him, but she didn't have to. The world was folding to fit her desires. Her friends began to joke about how lucky she was. Emma's charmed, one said. She could fall face first into a pile of garbage and come out with gold. Emma smiled, but she knew the truth. This wasn't luck, it was power. Yet with each assumption fulfilled, something inside her tightened, a quiet unease. The way people looked at her lingered a little too long. Conversations sometimes echoed back strange phrases. A barista handed her a cup and said, "Your wish is my command." Eyes blank. She laughed it off, until it happened again and again. Then came the night she couldn't ignore it. It was 2:12 a.m. She was sipping herbal tea on her balcony, watching the city hum below, when the thought came casually, what if someone's watching me? Just a passing flicker of paranoia, a meaningless assumption. But the next evening, as she returned home from a perfect dinner with Julian, a sleek black car was parked across the street, engine running, windows tinted, no plates. She assumed it was a coincidence, until it was there again the next night, and the next. Emma stood by her curtains, watching the car idle, unmoving, unfazed. Something in her stomach twisted. She whispered, almost involuntarily, "No one is watching me." The car slowly drove away, but by then, the chill had already set in. Emma tried to brush it off. The car, the stairs, the glitches in conversations. She told herself she was imagining things, that she just needed rest. But beneath her polished calm, the truth scratched at her thoughts. Every assumption was coming true. The good ones, yes, but now the darker ones too. It started small. She had a flash of doubt about Julian. What if he's hiding something? After noticing him silencing a call during dinner. The next day, his phone lit up with a message preview. "Can't wait to see you again." Emma said nothing, but her chest tightened. That night, he suddenly canceled their weekend trip, said something had come up. He didn't say what. At work, she passed by Clara, her overly friendly, always complimenting colleague, and rolled her eyes internally. She probably wants my job. By the end of the week, Clara was gone. Fired for a data breach Emma had never heard about. HR brushed it off as a coincidence. She must be been sloppy, they said. Good thing you're so reliable. Emma didn't feel lucky anymore. She felt dangerous. Then came the worst moment yet. Her best friend, Leela, called late one evening. Emotional, tense. She'd been feeling neglected, left behind by Emma's meteoric rise. Emma, overwhelmed and distracted, muttered under her breath after the call, "I just wish she would stop bothering me." She didn't mean it. But the next morning, Leela was in the hospital. A freak accident, they said. Slipped down the stairs. Concussion. Disoriented. Can't remember what happened? Emma dropped the phone. Her hands were shaking. The words she'd spoken, had they caused this? She raced to the journal, flipping through its pages, looking for fine print, a warning, a loophole, anything. But it remained silent, the same cryptic lines staring back at her. Assume it's true, and it becomes true. The realization hit her like cold water. She wasn't being haunted. She was the ghost. Emma wasn't witnessing strange events. She was willing them into being. And worst of all, she didn't know how to stop. Sleep was no longer a refuge. Emma's nights were restless, haunted by visions that felt more like memories than dreams. Distorted images of herself in unfamiliar places, speaking to people she didn't know but somehow recognize. She began to wonder if the assumptions were unraveling something far deeper than reality, her identity. One morning, as steam clouded her bathroom mirror, Emma froze mid-routine, for a flicker of a second, so fast she almost missed it. Her reflection didn't move in sync. It lagged, then caught up. She stared into her own eyes, heart hammering, searching for proof it had happened. But the moment was gone. Except the feeling wasn't. She started noticing it everywhere. Subtle inconsistencies. Her apartment keys were slightly rearranged. An outfit she knew she hadn't worn for weeks was crumpled at the foot of her bed. A voicemail appeared from a number that didn't exist. It was 5 seconds of static and breathing. Then came the photos. In a group picture from work, taken just days earlier, there she was, Emma, smiling on the left. But in the far right corner, almost hidden in the blur of movement, stood a woman in a red scarf, facing the camera, eyes locked on Emma. She chalked it up to coincidence, until she saw another photo, this one on Julian's Instagram, a picture of their date night at the rooftop lounge. And again in the background the woman, same scarf, same blank stare. Emma's skin prickled. With trembling lips, she whispered the words she hadn't dared speak, "Someone is watching me." That night, the knock came. 3 short raps. Calm. Measured. Emma opened the door to find the woman in the red scarf standing silently on the threshold. No introduction. No expression. Just eyes full of ancient recognition, like she'd been waiting a long time. She handed Emma a small white card and turned away. Emma looked down. One sentence, printed in clean, minimalist font. "You're not the first." No name. No explanation. Just a terrifying implication. This wasn't just happening to her. Emma didn't sleep after the woman's visit. She sat upright in bed, staring at the card for hours. "You're not the first." Over and over, she repeated it in her mind like a mantra, or a curse. The next morning, the card was gone. She had placed it on her nightstand. Now, just an empty space. But something new had appeared. A folded paper tucked into her purse. She hadn't seen it before. No one could have slipped it in, not unless they'd been impossibly close. It was a map, hand-drawn. Only one location was marked, circled in crimson ink. Midnight. Come alone. It led her to an unmarked service elevator in the basement of a defunct theater downtown. The building looked condemned, graffiti-stained, its windows long shattered. But when she stepped inside, it felt alive. The elevator creaked downward farther than it should be. No buttons, no floor numbers, just darkness humming behind the steel doors. And then they opened. A vast underground chamber revealed itself, elegant, candlelit, with walls lined in old books, and mirrors that didn't reflect the room accurately. People stood in silent clusters, sipping wine from glass goblets, dressed in tailored black. Some looked like CEOs, others like monks. One woman wore a gown that shimmered like it was woven from starlight. They all turned when she entered. None smiled. "You've assumed your way into visibility," a man with silver hair said, stepping forward. "You're no longer among the unaware." Emma barely managed to speak. "What is this?" He gave a slight bow. "We are the assumers. And you, Emma Morgan, have found us sooner than most." He explained it with eerie calm. The law of assumption wasn't just real, it was ancient, passed down through generations, protected and studied. The assumers had learned to control it with surgical precision, influencing the world from the shadows. Markets, elections, catastrophes, miracles, all seeded by assumption. Their power lay not in force, but in belief. "You think it, you feel it, and if you assume it fully it must become," he said. "That is not magic, that is law." Emma asked why she was here. "Why now?" "Because you assumed your way in, Another voice whispered behind her, but not all welcomed her. A stern woman warned her sharply. Assumption is a blade. Casual thoughts become accidents. One untrained mind can collapse a reality. The mirrors around the room flickered for a moment, showing versions of herself she didn't recognize, some crying, some screaming, some missing altogether. Emma swallowed hard. This wasn't empowerment. This was exposure. And for the first time since opening the journal, she wished she could unlearn everything. Emma left the underground gathering with a head full of warnings and a heart full of dread. The assumers had told her to refine her focus, to assume with intention, not emotion. But how could she do that when her thoughts never stopped? Her mind, once a tool of logic and planning, had become a weapon of chaos. Even her silence felt dangerous, so she tried to pull back. She deleted the journal app, where she'd been logging assumptions. She meditated in the mornings, forcing herself to think only of calm things, trees, oceans, breathing. She whispered gentle affirmations. Today will be still. Today will be normal. But reality had already loosened its grip. One morning, she opened her fridge to find the milk bottle had multiplied. 4 identical bottles, same expiration date, same half-full level. She blinked, closed the door, and opened it again. Now there were 2. The next day, the bathroom tap ran backward, water pulling itself up from the drain. Rain began falling in her living room one afternoon, soft and silent, leaving no puddles. Time began to break. Emma would check the clock. 3:07. A moment later, 4:52. She'd lose hours with no memory of where she'd been. In one gap, she found an unfamiliar bruise on her arm, and a note in her handwriting that read, "Don't assume safety, assume clarity." Julian vanished mid-conversation. One moment he was sitting across from her at dinner, mid-sentence about his favorite movie, and the next, his chair was empty, food untouched, his name gone from her phone, as if he'd never existed. Emma ran to the mirror. Her reflection was wrong again. She lifted her hand. The image didn't move. She touched the glass, and the reflection smiled. That night, she returned to the assumers. She demanded answers, desperate for control. One of them, a quiet man who hadn't spoken before, finally stepped forward and whispered, "You've slipped." Slipped. He nodded solemnly. "Your assumptions are no longer shaping this world. They're unstitching it. When belief becomes unstable, so does the construct holding everything together." Emma's breath caught. "But I'm only assuming good things now. Peace, stillness." He looked at her with pity. Even light, applied without precision, can blind. Then he added one final, haunting line. "The more power you wield, the less the world obeys logic." Emma stared into the candlelight, watching it flicker upside down. And for the first time, she didn't know what was real, or if she had ever truly been. Emma was unraveling, and she knew it. Her world had become a fragile illusion, beautiful one moment, broken the next. She no longer trusted time, space, or even her own memory. People disappeared mid-sentence. Street names changed between blinks. Her thoughts, once a private stream of consciousness, now echoed with consequences she couldn't predict. She needed answers. So she returned to the book, the strange, unmarked journal that had started everything. She hadn't touched it in days, maybe weeks. It now sat heavier, as though it had absorbed the weight of all she'd done. When she opened it, the pages pulsed faintly, like breathing parchment. Many of the lines she remembered had changed. Others were missing entirely. But then she found it, near the end, scrawled in a different handwriting, darker, slanted, frantic, was a page that hadn't been there before. It read, "If you assume the law itself is false, everything reverts." Emma's pulse quickened. A reset, a way out. But underneath it, in faint pencil as if written later, almost as a warning, "Assume it wrong and you may erase more than just the law." Her hands trembled. Was this a trap, a loophole, or her only salvation? What would reverting mean? Would it undo the chaos, the slippage? Would it bring back Julian, stabilize time, make the mirrors reflect properly again? Or would it wipe everything, her life, her memories, even herself? The voices of the assumers echoed in her head. Assumption is a blade. Control requires precision. And now she understood the most terrifying truth. The law wasn't just about creating reality. It was about believing in its structure, its laws, its boundaries. If she assumed the law was false, she wouldn't just break a rule. She might shatter the very frame holding her existence together. And still a darker question rose in her mind. What if the assumers themselves were just another assumption? What if she had created all of this alone? Emma closed the book slowly, tears stinging her eyes. She was running out of time, and worse, out of herself. Emma stood in the center of her apartment, the journal in one hand, her breath shallow. The lights flickered, the walls pulsed like lungs. Nothing felt still anymore, not the air, not her thoughts, not the very shape of her reality. She had tried to play by the rules. She had tried to assume light. And now, the world was decaying under the weight of her mind. She looked into the mirror one last time and whispered, "None of this is real." The effect was instantaneous. The mirror didn't crack. It melted, its glass warping like liquid metal. The walls behind her twisted like paper. Gravity reversed. Sound vanished. She wasn't falling or floating. She was dissolving. Her name, her memories, her sense of space, all gone. Just a white-hot rush of everything collapsing inward. And then silence. When Emma opened her eyes, she was lying on a cold metal table under fluorescent lights. Gone was the flickering apartment. Gone were the candles, the book, the red scarf-ed woman. Now she was surrounded by curved glass walls and sleek machines humming with soft blue pulses. Monitors lined the room, each displaying what looked like versions of her life, but with subtle, unnerving differences. In one, she saw herself married. In another, homeless. In yet another, she wasn't there at all. A door hissed open. Footsteps approached. And then, her, the woman in the red scarf, now wearing a sterile white lab coat, clipboard in hand. Emma tried to sit up, her limbs heavy with confusion. The woman smiled, not cold, but clinical. "Welcome back," she said softly. "You finally broke the loop." Emma's mouth opened, but no words came. Her mind spun. "Where am I?" she croaked. The woman didn't answer at first. Instead, she tapped a screen showing a looping image, Emma holding the journal, reading the words, making her first assumption. "You've been part of a high-level simulation," the woman finally explained, "designed to test the limits of belief-driven cognition. Your consciousness was inserted to observe what happens when reality responds directly to thought. You made it further than any subject we've had." Emma blinked. Simulation. Test. Nothing made sense. And yet didn't it? The woman stepped closer. "We had to wait until you assumed your way out. That was the only way the trial could end." Emma stared at the monitor, at all the other versions of herself, at the infinite could-have-beens. The woman in the lab coat smiled again, but this time, there was something hidden behind her eyes, something watching. "Let's talk about what you changed while you were in there," she said. And Emma realized she hadn't just escaped the illusion, she might have rewritten what was real. Emma sat in the cold lab, her palms pressed against the chrome table, trying to anchor herself to something real, if anything still was. She listened as the woman in the lab coat, Dr. Sierra Levin, according to her badge, began explaining the truth. Not slowly, not gently, it came at her like a flood. "You were part of Project Origin," Dr. Levin said, "a cognitive simulation created to study the law of assumption in applied consciousness. You volunteered, though your conscious memory was suppressed for integrity." Emma shook her head. "I didn't volunteer for any of this." "You did," Levin said calmly, tapping a screen. It lit up with video footage. Emma, months earlier, signing a contract. She looked exhausted, bitter, detached from the world. Her voice on the recording said, "If I can't control anything out there, then I'll control everything in here." It didn't feel like her, and yet it was her. Levin continued, "You were meant to test a theoretical frontier. What happens when reality responds not to logic or law, but to thought, to belief, to assumption. Most subjects collapse within days. Delusions spiral, minds shatter. But you built a life, a world, multiple, in fact." She gestured to the monitors. Emma turned. Each screen showed a different iteration. Emma as a child star, as a cult leader, as a woman who never left the bookstore. Some screens blurred before her eyes, flickering violently as if unstable. "You didn't just create dreams," Levin said. "You created fractures." "What does that mean?" Emma whispered. "Every assumption you made didn't just shift the simulation, it echoed outward. Tiny shockwaves into the real world. People's thoughts, behaviors, even memories were influenced. You were leaking." Levin leaned in. "Do you remember when your best friend ended up in the hospital?" Emma froze. That wasn't an illusion. That version of her exists. Somewhere, you assumed her harm, and somewhere, she experienced it. Emma's stomach turned. She thought she was playing in a sandbox, a personal experiment, but her whims had spilled into other versions of reality, affecting people, timelines, lives. Every assumption hadn't just shifted her story, it had rewritten others. "You broke the loop," Levin said, "but you left the mirror cracked." Tears welled in Emma's eyes. "So what now?" "You have a choice," Levin said, her voice turning clinical again. "You can have your memories wiped and return to your original life, your true life." Whoa. She turned a screen toward Emma. On it, another version of herself was spiraling, terrified, alone, still trapped in a reality Emma had fractured. you can re-enter the field, but this time, with full awareness, to repair what you broke. Stabilize the assumptions. Help others escape the systems they don't even know they're in. Emma stared at the screen. One life was hers. The other was Evryon's, and she still wasn't sure which one was real. The lab was quiet now, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Emma stood alone beside the glowing monitors, each one still playing fragments of her alternate lives. Some showed joy, others collapse. In one, she held a child she'd never had. In another, she was old, alone, talking to herself in a mirror. All of them were her, and none of them were. Across the room, Dr. Levin waited with two sealed folders in hand. One contains your memory wipe protocol, she said. It'll return you to your pre-experiment life. You'll remember none of this. You'll live as Emma Morgan, the strategist, the perfectionist, the woman who walked into a bookstore on a rainy Thursday and never picked up that book. And the other? Emma asked. Dr. Levin held it up. Full field access. Re-entry with cognitive integrity. But this time, you go and awake. You help repair the damage, contain the slippage, guide others, if you can find them. Emma's hands trembled. And if I fail again? Levin didn't answer. She didn't need to. Emma turned back to the monitors. Her eyes locked onto one screen, where a version of herself was pacing a dimly lit room, holding the same weathered journal, whispering the words, "Assume it's true, and it becomes true." She remembered that moment. She remembered the thrill, the power, and the terror that followed. She took a deep breath, walked toward Levin, looked her straight in the eye, and said, "I assume you're lying." The lab lights flickered violently. Monitors flashed red. The ground trembled beneath them as if reality itself had taken offense. Dr. Levin's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted. Panic, maybe, or recognition. "Emma, you don't know what you're." Crack. The glass walls splintered like ice. The folders disintegrated in Levin's hands. The ceiling peeled open into blackness. Emma's body lifted off the ground, not flying, not falling, just ascending into something else entirely. And in her mind, one final truth echoed back. Assumption isn't about belief, it's about authorship. And maybe she was never the subject of the experiment. Maybe she was the one writing it. Fade to black. Title card, to be continued or not. That's up to what you assume next.